Louis Theroux, thanks very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
In your memoir, Got to Get Through This, there's a photograph of you as a toddler looking somewhat pensive, and it's captioned, aged 3, already worried. Your anxiety is a pretty constant theme throughout the book. How much has being the kind of person who wonders, but what if this happens, helped you in your line of work?
I think it's been what drove me to a great extent. And by the way, thank you for saying the photo makes me look pensive, because I tend to think it might make me look gormless or clueless. My mouth is kind of hanging open, and I just look at the camera. I was 3 years old, and I'm looking at the camera as though it might be about to either attack me or confuse me, which I suppose is a good, turned out to be a good life skill in my professional work. But I think because I was anxious and I was worried about things, it meant that I overcompensated by probably working a little too hard, certainly in my school days. And then when it came time to do my journalism, in some deep way, I suppose, I was kind of looking for answers or looking for a certain emotional kind of safety in the stories that I was doing by spending time with people who seemed to have more certainty than I did, and also who seemed to have more to worry about than I did.
Through your work, you've met so many different people in so many different circumstances. Despite all the diversity, at the core of it, are there any fundamental truths that you've come to believe about human nature?
You know, it's a big question, and I wish I had a pithy answer for you. I've always secretly hoped that I might be working on a kind of grand unified field theory of the human condition. I mean, I think it's clear that we all crave love, we all crave some kind of meaning or significance. But the trouble is we express those things in wildly different ways. I mean, I think we are all underneath driven by very similar drives, but they get conditioned and socialized into behaviors that are diametrically opposed. I would say that my experiences with cults and even racists and neo-Nazis has taught me that they're driven by many of the same things more mainstream people are, and that oftentimes the people in those worlds are there because of some conditioning they've had, and that it's almost a feeling of there, but for the grace of God go I, that we all have dark impulses, and it's only by dint of our situations, our education, our upbringing and so on, that we kind of make our way into a more sort of pro-social way of being.
Have you ever been interviewing somebody like that and felt disturbed because they've said something that you felt has connected to something dark in your own nature that you can relate to?
Oh yes, definitely, and it's a sort of occupational hazard of the job. Although I tend to think that a little bit of kind of Stockholm syndrome, if you like, is a necessary precondition for aspects of my work. That I'm there trying to build more than the usual journalistic relationship. But to answer the question, yes, I think there's a strange thing that happens where you begin to slightly see things, not in all respects, but more in certain respects from the point of view of the subject that you're with.
In your TV work, you ask very direct, clear and concise and often very personal questions. Do you ever feel scared to do that when you know that moment's coming up?
I tend to think, especially when you're talking about really sensitive subjects, the person that you're speaking to is almost hoping that you will ask the difficult question.
What does it feel like?
Like I'm dying as a person.
Sean, still to the apartment because they're coming to my investigation.
Yeah.
I think if it's the person who is the more sort of adversarial, combative type of subject, someone who's up to something that might be controversial or deeply questionable, you can have a little momentary anxiety. But in general, you've got a camera there. The person knows that they're there to answer the questions. That being said, sometimes it goes pear-shaped, and the person you're talking to can freak out and look like she might punch you, and it's never a good feeling.
I'm telling you that we're the ones who are strictly adhering to the doctrines of faith of all the mainline religions. They're not, we are. So what else you got?
In your book, you write about a documentary you did about dementia and people who care for people with dementia. And there's a woman in an aged care facility in the doco who seems very lost and in her own world. And her son keeps visiting her regularly and she doesn't seem to know who he is, but there's this one moment where she sort of sets her eyes on him and she pats his face and her face lights up and he says to you, "That's why I keep coming." And there's a shot of you and you look like you're about a whisker away from sobbing. Do you feel that the nature of your job requires you to suppress your own emotion on camera, and what sort of cost does that impose on you?
Well, look, this is the part of the interview where I reveal myself to be either strangely hard-hearted or kind of professionally ultra-composed. Because the weird part is I really almost never feel a strong urge to... I never have the sensation of having to suppress emotion.
Sorry, I wonder if I'm projecting as a viewer then how I feel about it onto you.
Well, I think that's part of it. But the odd part is that also when I watch these scenes of very heightened emotion, I get more emotional watching it than I did in the experience of being there. You know, there's a certain analogy with... I've also made programs about people undergoing operations, including plastic surgery. And when you're there seeing an operation take place, you know, it might have someone's face peeled off, right? While they kind of break her nose and reset her nose. And you're there and you're like looking at it like, that's kind of weird. It's a bit like peering into a butcher's shop window. But then when you watch it back in the editing room or on TV, it's much more difficult to watch. It's kind of disgusting. And in the emotional... In the emotions are the same way. Like I don't quite know why it is, but I think perhaps when I'm actually there, I'm so wrapped up in the experience of trying to figure out what's going on that I often don't have the sort of the time or space to see it in a completely human way. Or maybe because to bring it back to my book, one of the themes in my book is like, I seem to be like an emotional cretin, if I can use that term. I hope that's not an offensive term. In other words, I don't seem to know what I'm feeling half the time, I don't know how common this is. I don't know if this is part of the condition known in some circles as being a man, or maybe this is just condition of being Louis Theroux. But I seem not to get clear emotional signals half the time in situations where you would think it would be pretty clear what you would be feeling.
Louis Theroux, it's been really interesting talking to you. Thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Hi, I'm Lee Sales. Thanks for watching this story. If you'd like to watch more of 730's stories, they are on the left of your screen. And tap on the button below to subscribe and get the latest from ABC News.